And in the first place, the thing I'm accused of is not naming sources. And of course, I noticed both the story in the New York Times and the Washington Post this morning. I still get the papers in print. I like to see a paper. Both had no sources in it either. And when I worked for the New York Times for seven years during Watergate and Vietnam, I was hired to do Vietnam. I was actually working at the New Yorker and left the New Yorker to go work at the New York Times because at that point in 72, it was a straight newspaper. In other words, there were guys in Saigon, Homer Bigard and Dave Halberstam and Neil Sheehan, who were doing great reporting. And the Washington Bureau was, as it always was in those days, very pro-president and, and the government. And I was hired to go make whoopee there by Abe Rosenthal. And at that time, it was a different newspaper. I just, I wrote maybe 1,000 stories in 7 years, including really important stories about Chile and the CIA and NSA. And 99% of them had no sources, but they all, they trusted me. Even when I wrote a story about domestic spying that I didn't tell the editors about on Friday, and I wrote 7,000 words that day and was in the paper Sunday with banner headlines and 7 unnamed sources. And one editor asked me a question. So it's just a silly thing to decide that because I don't name sources or I don't put anybody in a meeting, which is the critical thing not to do, that it doesn't exist. That's just an excuse. And so the New York Times has a lot of very good reporters on it. And ditto for the Washington Post. My argument has always been, since I left the newspaper business and I saw who got promoted and who did not, I'm convinced that if we got rid of 90% of the editors, we'd be much better off. Well, not here in terms of the major media or even CNN. I think we're talking about post-Trump, and post-Trump really changed the media landscape. You were Fox, you were either Fox or CNN and MSNBC, and you were either the New York Post and other papers like that, that conservative, or you were with the New York Times and Washington Post. And so the papers just fell that way. And so when I come up with a story that's very anti-Biden, look, what's going on now in this White House is terrifying to me. I don't know if anybody's paid attention to I think the Prime Minister of China, the number 2 guy in China, has been saying that they're writing us off. They've had it with our snotty comments and canceling meetings because of a balloon. A Secretary of State canceling a meeting with his counterpart because of a balloon and publicly doing it and pointing his finger in a public meeting at a senior Chinese official. I can tell you, I know Americans who have Chinese descent in the government, who have taken diplomats abroad, serious guys. And one thing you do is you never do what Tony Blinken did when he was in China, pointing a finger in public to his counterpart. You just don't do that. And so these guys, I don't know what, Blinken and Sullivan and Newland, I call them Lincoln, Blinken, and Nod. If you've ever had kids, you know what I'm talking about, the children's story. They're just out of their league here. They may have wonderful degrees and diplomas and experience. They're just out of their league. Do they really want to get into a NATO war? And there's no question, we've been increasing the amount of American troops in Poland secretly and deploying much more force, many more arms up in that area. Obviously, with the idea, I would guess, that the president may authorize or they may push for NATO actually to make a physical presence. It's going to be over in Ukraine. It's just a question of when Putin pulls it, whether you like Putin or don't like Putin. How can you like a guy that started the bloodiest war in Western Europe since World War II? We had the Balkans and Chechnya, but this is something else. So you have to fault him for that. But it isn't without some reason, or at least some provocation. We expanded NATO to the east. Everybody's watching a show and knows what I'm talking about. We also put what we call defensive missiles that can be turned overnight in the missiles that can throw nuclear bombs into Moscow, 800 miles away with 7 minutes. How far would it take? We've also escalated the rhetoric. And I don't know what the goal is. I don't know if they know what the goal is. I guess historically, presidents who have wars do better in elections. I mean, that's just a fact. That the public rallies around a president. I don't know what's going on in that White House, but it's very scary and very dumb. And the story they put out yesterday is just another example of idiocy. Well, let me just say this. What happened here with the press blackout didn't happen in the rest of the world. It's all over the world. Joe Biden made a decision to blow up the pipelines because he was afraid that he learned then that there was a stalemate coming at best in the war in Ukraine. He wanted more support from Europe, Western Europe, and Germany. And historically, since the Kennedy years, American presidents, this is all part of the containment business, the post-World War II Russia containing communism business. Historically, presidents have been frightened and worried about the Russian influence because of its huge amounts of natural gas and oil that they were selling in Europe. That always tried to stop it. It's nothing new. So there you are. We're in a terrible place right now because the crap they put out yesterday isn't going to work. Nobody's going to believe. Nobody's going to believe that. What Der Zeit said, some guys in a yacht dropped it. We're talking about C4 with enough C4 to blow up a major building in Washington or New York even for each of the pipelines. I'm hoping that the major press is going to pick this up and follow it. I've had, from the day I wrote Me Lie, I've had people for months say it can't be true. When I wrote the story, what was the story? I mentioned the one about domestic spying, and I said the CIA had been spying on literally hundreds of thousands of American anti-war citizens and reporters and congresspeople. And the Washington Post for 3 months, every other week, my good friend Larry Stern, I adored him, who was one of their senior editors and reporters, was writing the stories. I mean, a buddy of mine saying Hersh is dead wrong, it was the FBI. And then, of course, to his credit, Bill Colby, the head of the CIA at a hearing, told the truth. He said, yeah, there's something to it. But anyway, the bottom line is, no, I'm not hoping for the American press to do anything. The only thing that's going to happen is in Europe, here's what the president did, as far as I can tell. And by the way, I've been writing every Wednesday on my Substack. And I wrote, one of the pieces I wrote was all about Norway. If you remember, I said that Norway was involved. I wrote a piece about how Norway worked with us early in the Vietnam War. We were going and provoking stuff in 1964, before North Vietnam even got into the war. SEALs were working on Norwegian boats, advanced PT boats, larger PT boats than the one that Kennedy was in World War II. They were going they were driving up on the coast of North Vietnam, dropping SEALs off who were going in, gutsy guys, and trying to blow up radar sites and military sites. And 2 of the guys even got wounded badly and crawled back and made it back and got medals of honor in secrecy. I wrote a piece about that a couple of weeks later, making the point that it's not unusual. We have a history of working with Norway. I actually have a photograph of Bill Colby, who was a lot of these guys in the CIA. He was in the Office of Special Services, OSS, and he was behind enemy lines in Norway, working with special forces in Norway. I have photographs of him in 45 and 44, in the middle of winter, doing all kinds of crap against the Nazis. I mean, these guys, Helms and Colby, I wrote a lot of bad stories about him. And to their credit, I mean, Helms, before he died, he was the head of the CIA for many years and was involved in the Castro stuff and a lot of stuff for the president that he couldn't tell the Congress about. He called me in and we had a long talk before he died about what really was going on that I couldn't use. But, the CIA doesn't work for the Congress or for the Constitution. It works for the Crown. It works for the president. Why does the president keep a CIA around? You got a guy, Obama, even particularly this guy now, Biden. He's not going to get his way in Congress, but he can take a walk in the Rose Garden with the head of the CIA, and somebody can be hurt 8,000 miles away. That makes you feel pretty good. And we need a president that has more integrity than this guy does. And not that I'm all for his domestic program, but not not to go piss on the head of the Chinese, and quite as much as he did on Putin.